Okay. Hello, everyone. Today I'm here with Dr. Nave, and we're going to be talking about Hashimoto's and depression. Dr. Nave is from Arizona. She's a naturopathic doctor, and today we're going to go into the neurological effects of Hashimoto's and how they happen, what you can do about them. Dr. Nave also has a passion for intergenerational traumas and resolving them. So I'm so happy to have you here today and would love to learn a little more about your story.
Thank you for having me as well. I'm really excited to have this discussion with you. So I was drawn to naturopathic medicine before I knew what it was. So I'm originally from Jamaica, and in my culture, there is a great emphasis on being connected to the land, using herbs for medicine. We're very passionate people. And however, as is common for a lot of us who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, there's a lot of stigma around mental health. You're told to pray it away, or like, oh, it's not a big a deal. There's a lot of minimizing, and now we have the language for that, like spiritual bypassing. Oh, it will be fine, that kind of thing. And so for me as a Christian, when I look at how God sees us, he sees us as whole beings, not just physical beings, but spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical. I wanted the medicine that I use to partner in my client's healing to have a similar kind of approach. And so when I found naturopathic medicine, it was kind of like an aha, like, oh, here's the name for the way in which I always wanted to practice, And so I am very passionate about it being a partnership, because you as the client, all of us have expertise in our bodies. And in modern medicine, that expertise is often minimized, especially if you're a woman. And even more so if you are a BIPOC woman, a woman of color. And so I'm especially passionate about working with women to unlock the vibrant, vivacious person that's living within them. And the way in which I choose to do that is by addressing intergenerational trauma, trauma healing, and or hormones.
I love that. So, there's all types of women that suffer from Hashimoto's. How do you pinpoint, their trauma? And usually, is it just the intergenerational trauma, or is it something else that sort of leads them into, these sort of conditions?
So before I answer that question, I think it would be good for our audience to sort of like have a framework as to what trauma is and what intergenerational trauma is. So trauma is not so much about the circumstance as opposed to the body's response to things being too overwhelming, too much, too soon, too quickly. And it is such a high stimulus that your body sort of like shuts down to conserve energy and to keep you safe. And so it becomes a problem, however, when it is we're stuck in that mode and we don't leave it. And when we're stuck in that mode, that can lead to us passing on the trauma to other people in the way that we relate to each other, as well as that can affect the way in which our DNA is expressed, which is how we get the intergenerational trauma piece. And so when thinking of the trauma and how to figure out what aspects of the woman's story is being affected by this, it's all in the way that she tells her story, right? So for what I've seen for a lot of us, when we talk about our experiences, for a lot of the women that I've worked with, this statement is pretty common. I haven't been well since. And it may be that they were an exuberant child, they enjoyed their life, maybe they were quiet, whatever it is, but something happened and it changed the trajectory. Or maybe it wasn't so much as a exclamation experience, meaning like this was the thing and then nothing has been the same since, maybe it has been a collection of different scenarios and experiences that have led to where they are. And so it's more about me listening in on what she's telling me and what she's not telling me. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because there's a lot of weight in the nonverbal.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I
Yes.
see. So, like, I knew I grew up with a lot of intergenerational trauma myself, and
Mm-hmm.
I had this sort of, I would say disconnect from my family, and
Mm-hmm.
because I grew up in a very dysfunctional home, and
Mm-hmm.
in order for me to maintain any sort of peace, I had to
Mm-hmm.
sort of just leave that space, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that environment was causing a lot of this chronic stress in my body in itself. And a lot of people don't notice that, like they
Mm-hmm.
don't notice the stress that is being caused on their bodies and where it could be from. But, when they think of stress, it's like, oh, like high demand work, or like, that go lifestyle. But there's other silent stressors, like,
Right.
their environment, that they
Mm-hmm.
could never think about. Would you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love that you said that it could be these silent stressors, because I think society discredits the intuition or gut feelings or your spirit, like being sensitive to these things. So some examples could be like, oh, I had a really great childhood. My family was really great. My parents were really supportive. But I had this one aunt that whenever I'd see her, she'd be like, oh, you're getting fat, or oh, you shouldn't wear that dress, or you shouldn't wear that hat, or maybe you've come out of the closet. I don't even like that term. You've come out as your full self, and suddenly your parents have disowned you or didn't show up to your wedding. All of those things are stressors, right? And what determines whether it becomes traumatic is more about the response. Like, is it so overwhelming to you that something happens afterwards? And so when we think about those trauma responses and how it can show up: anxiety, depression, um, perfectionism, working a lot or seeing your worth in your work, spending all your time on your children and never spending time on yourself. And those things can pile up, right? And just like you were saying, with like being with your family and it being a chronic stressor, research has shown that for those of us who have intergenerational trauma, which I'll give some examples of intergenerational trauma, some big ones like racism, slavery, any forms of genocide, the Holocaust. You might not have been witness to the event itself, but if your grandparents or your ancestors experienced it, that influences you, which can feel really heavy because it's like, crap.
Yeah, patriarchy,
Right.
yeah, even the wars and
Mm-hmm.
extreme poverty. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
PTSD, all these things
Mm-hmm.
sort of, I mean, you may not, know about them because you didn't have to live through them, but
Mm-hmm.
I think they get carried on, and they come into different forms through
Right.
your parents and then
Mm-hmm.
down to you, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it even affects the way in which we relate to ourselves, you know? Um, yeah. And so with the autoimmune piece, going back to the intergenerational trauma and the DNA alteration, is that what they've seen, most of the studies have mostly looked at Holocaust survivors and haven't looked at the other intergenerational traumas that we've mentioned, those historical traumas. But what they have seen in the Holocaust survivors is that there's this the DNA expression is changed. And the DNA is basically the information that our bodies use to make every single thing in our bodies. Every protein, every cell, every single thing depends on the DNA. And the trauma basically works in an epigenetic, meaning it's outside of the genes, but it's informing the way in which it's expressed way. And in addition to this, there's this lower production of cortisol, which, if you don't know cortisol, people think of it as a stress hormone, but it's also important for the regulation of your immune function. It's also involved in blood sugar regulation. When you're feeling really hungry, cortisol increases so that your body can break down the stored fat or glycogen source so you have energy and you don't immediately die when you're hungry. So you have lower production of the cortisol hormone, which might make you feel really fatigued, have brain fog, difficulty focusing, feeling really depressed, all of those symptoms that we also see in Hashimoto's, right? And then in addition to the lower production of cortisol, the body is also more sensitive to those cortisol changes, which means then when you experience stress, you might have an exaggerated response to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So because I thought that like increased cortisol would also kind of make us feel, like you get like weight gain, you get the brain fog, because your body is in fight mode. It's exhausted, right? So like, isn't it exhausted when you produce more cortisol?
Not exactly. It's not so much about the level as opposed to how long it's in that state. So when we think of chronic stress, that is prolonged production of cortisol. So let me back up a little bit. So the stress response, we have an acute stressor, and the first response is adrenaline made by the adrenal glands, right? And then the secondary response is the cortisol, because the adrenaline is quickly broken down by the body. And so you can't really sustain that level of heightened stress for a long period of time. And when cortisol starts to increase, we see an increase in immune function. So like increased inflammation so that you can fight off colds, that kind of stuff. But if it's chronic, meaning you're in a chronic state of stress, you've experienced trauma, the cortisol levels stay around longer, which actually inhibit immune function, increase weight gain, make you feel more tired, and all those kind of symptoms. So everything in the body is more so about balance. It's all about balance. You don't want things too high or too low. It's kind of like a Goldilocks situation, honestly.
That's so true. I remember, and it's so hard to find that balance, especially when your body's been in that mode for a while, and of course, all the traumas and everything. So, how do you help people create this calm and this balance?
So, I do it in a multifactorial way. So, when I work with clients, for the first session, like the new client intake, I break it up into 2 sessions, 2 segments. And the first one is like the medical information, the objective information. This happened, then this happened, these are my symptoms kind of thing. And the second session, I want to hear their story in their own words. I want to understand exactly how they experience their dis-ease. What is important to them? What are the symptoms that are the worst for them and why? How do they experience that? Because in that moment and in that session, how other people experience it is irrelevant, because how you experience it gives me the most information in terms of how to tailor your summary sheet, your individualized roadmap to health and wellness for you. Because what is important to you might not be important to someone else, and that is an important part in terms of meeting that success, because the success is dependent on what you want it to be, not me.
Exactly. Of course. And I think, a lot of people, a lot of women come to me and
Mhm,
they tell me, hey, how do I lose my weight? How do I,
mhm,
have this hair stop falling out? And,
mhm,
behind that, I see a lot of like body image issues. I see
mhm,
eating disorders,
mhm,
fear of food when it comes to like
mhm,
everything and anything they're
mhm,
putting in their bodies, and
mhm,
almost that loss of confidence. And I
mhm,
understand, like they don't want to be judged, they want to
mhm,
feel confident, they want to look
mhm,
good, but
mhm.
how do you help someone through that? Because I'm sure you meet a lot of women as well who
Mhm.
have weight gain as their number one symptom, right?
Yeah, yep. A lot of women say that. And I love that you had mentioned the patriarchy earlier because I feel like our body image is tied up so much in terms of culture and not our internal compass. And like an important aspect of healing is to be our full selves, not what the world told us to be, not what our parents said, or grandparents, or religion, or anything like that, you know? And so one of my colleagues and friends, my dear friends, she told me of this point, and I feel like this would be really great for all of you listening, is what has my condition given me? Not all the negatives, what has it taken away, but what has it given to me? You know, what are the positives of having this condition? Because what you may notice, and I've seen this with a lot of women who have autoimmune conditions, is that they may not have been putting themselves first in their lives. They may have been running themselves down, and now they have the opportunity to pause, to check in on how they're doing mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And if we become preoccupied with the weight gain and these symptoms that are telling us that something internally is going on, we may be missing a true gem to unlock us really being our full selves. And so, something I explore with women is I give them homework, I give them journaling homework. Um, you know, not just these are the things I don't like, but recognizing the parts of themselves that show up to protect them, to basically have a greater insight in as it relates to their inner workings, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, all of that stuff. Because we can do all of the lifestyle stuff, but unless we address the mental piece, then we're missing a key aspect of your personhood because you're not just a physical body.
Right. And, that's one of the things I've also practiced with many of the
Mm-hmm.
women in this group. I kind of just
Mm-hmm.
shared my own gifts from all these autoimmune conditions. And it
Mm-hmm.
was a lot of things. I mean, humility, gratitude,
Mm-hmm.
it really showed me to like not have an ego, like all these things that are sort of missing in our society today.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it gets you in touch with your soul. I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people lose their soul just living in today's society. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, with the illness, I kind of was able to discover myself and who I
Mm-hmm.
really was. And
Mm-hmm.
I saw that as a gift because
Mm-hmm.
it's like your story is someone else's guide. I think that's what they say, is
Mm-hmm.
someone else's survival guide. And that's kind of what had inspired me to bring this group of women together and create
Mm-hmm.
unity. But I saw all these gifts that, from childhood that I didn't see, and I kept getting hit with autoimmune conditions. And when I was younger, I thought, oh, this may be a curse, like it all these symptoms and dealing with the symptoms, it's almost like, am I like cursed to have these conditions, and you
Mm-hmm.
don't see the positive, but there's so much more that the eye can see. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of gifts in all of these sort of diseases. And I don't know, I mean, people have like a negative connotation when they think of disease, or
Mm-hmm.
when they think about these symptoms. But I don't think it's negative in a lot of ways. Without it, I probably would be a very emotionally immature person. I would think.
Yeah, I'm really grateful that you created this group for these women because we weren't created to do life alone, and modern society doesn't afford us community. And so I think this is a wonderful resource that you have created. Um, there was something that you said, I know I lost it. Oh well. I think it was with regards to the negative aspects of things. Um, I think another thing to remember is that you're not your condition,
Of course.
right? Because even when people talk about mental health, like I'm depressed rather than I am experiencing depression at this moment in time. When I see chronic conditions, or rather, what I notice about some who have chronic conditions, there's this tendency to identify with the condition and sort of to become absorbed in the condition as their identity, which can be a block to healing as well. Because if you're attached to it, the body sees the whether it's protective nature, like we don't do things just because is what I'm saying. There's always some reason behind it. It's always providing some benefit, even if it has a lot of negatives associated with it. So an example would be someone who has a substance, a chemical dependency, for example. The chemical itself provided something to them. It relieved some of that pressure so that they didn't have to confront the trauma because maybe they didn't have the tools, the time, the space to process it. And so, even as I say, seeing yourself as Hashimoto's, both of you being one, um, I also want for you to think of extending grace to yourself in the moments that you see yourself as being synonymous with your condition, because it is providing some benefit for you to think of it in that way. I just hope that you don't live in that state. Like it's not a persistent existence, basically.
Yeah, of course. Like, you don't want any of these conditions to define who you are. And
Mm-hmm.
you want to be creative with your life, live
Mm-hmm.
your best life, even with the condition you have. And, I saw it at first, I saw it as a setback, but, once you start learning and healing your body, it's
Mm-hmm.
actually the biggest gift you can have. Because I think, healing also involves addressing these traumas that you talk about. And how else would you have addressed the traumas if you didn't have this disease?
Yeah. I always hope that it doesn't have to come to this for someone to take time out for themselves. However, if you are at this point, now is as good a time as any.
So when someone comes in and they're
Mm-hmm.
dealing with depression, they're dealing
Mm-hmm.
with brain fog,
Mm-hmm.
um, is there like, do you just start them off with like supplements and diet? Like, is that your
No,
thing?
I don't like giving people a ton of supplements. I do all of my investigation up front. So if I do recommend any supplements at the beginning, it's if it might be like multivitamin, fish oil, vitamin D. So like that's like my foundational, whether you have an autoimmune condition or not, this is like foundation to support you being well. If you're already on a multivitamin, I'm not going to tell you to just stop it. If it's a good, and I'm using good loosely, maybe like a high quality, I prefer that terminology, high quality multivitamin and supplements that you're on, then I'm like, awesome job, keep up the good work. What are the other things that are going on in your life? And so that's what I'll do with the supplement aspect of things in the beginning. Otherwise, I do a lot of investigation. As I said, we get the medical history, which includes your family history. Does anyone else in your family have this condition? All that kind. Do you have a history of trauma? Because I ask those things too. Screening for depression, anxiety, any history of mental conditions, mental health conditions, any other conditions going on, any other symptoms, that like a full person situation is what I'm saying. And then that second one, it's them telling me, they're basically giving me a lot of information to help determine what homeopathic remedy I will recommend, because I use homeopathy as well, which is really gentle, cost-effective intervention that supports the body's own healing mechanism. And then other things would include like hydrotherapy. Are you drinking enough water? How to use alternating hot and cold to help with sleep, or if you're having sleep issues or depression or anxiety. Water is just really great. Hydrotherapy is like, if you have access to water and a way to heat up said water and some cloth, you are golden.
Love that.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So I think, we talked a lot about these sort of symptoms that people deal with from a neurological perspective to like weight gain, hair loss, all these different things. Can you share like a case that you've had with somebody who's dealt with Hashimoto's? They came in, they're like, Dr. Nave, we wanna I wanna lose some weight. How do I lose weight with Hashimoto's?
Whenever someone comes to me and they're like, oh, I want to lose some weight, I see that as a sign that something else is going on and that is not the real goal. And so I can think of, okay, let me think of a specific case. Okay, so a woman came in, she was in her late 40s. Dr. Nave, I'm coming in because I want to lose weight. That's what I'm here for. That's what I'm focused on. And as we were talking with each other things came up with regards to not just, oh, I have this condition and that's the reason why I'm gaining the weight, but my relationship to food. Oh, what is your relationship to food? So I have this book, I don't have it here right next to me, but it's called Intuitive Eating. And in the first few chapters, there's this quiz that familiarizes yourself with what type of eater you are. And through this exercise, she learned that food was a comfort. It was a protection. And then through our other sessions and discussions, it became evident that her mother controlled her food portions. And so then she didn't trust herself with whether she could take care of herself, right? And at some point during her childhood, she started to develop stomach issues that would flare up whenever she get anxious. And then her hormones started going wonky. Like she would skip periods and, like she would always be on edge, have difficulty focusing. was on a lot of medications because she was having acid reflux, and a lot of things were going on, which is common in autoimmune conditions. It's like one thing goes and then suddenly it's this cascade. And so what we did was we really honed in on education. So what is exactly going on with your body? What are the triggers for these episodes of anxiety and these flare-ups? And through that discussion, she became aware that though her focus was on the weight, that really wasn't the thing that was most important to her. And we did a lot of coordination of care. Hey, you told me that you don't want to be on this medication anymore. How about you talk to your doctor about that? Mm-hmm. You know, oh, you're experiencing anxiety whenever you eat this specific thing. Maybe not eat that specific thing. What is it about that specific thing that is what is that specific thing providing you? You know? And then she would tell me, oh, it's making me feel comforted in the short term, even though it's making me sick and making all my symptoms worse. I'm going to therapy and I'm on this medication and I'm really meticulous with all of the things that I do, and I feel spacey. And it's just like, we're basically, if her condition were a ball of yarn that was knotted, she is basically guiding me on what things are most important based on her symptoms, the story that she's telling, what her triggers are. And though I'm always sort of like alternating the medical with the mental emotional piece, and we're doing that dance, she is still guiding me on what things to prioritize based on how she is experiencing them.
I see.
Yeah. Yeah. And oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
Since then, she has made a decision to advocate for herself more with her PCP, because I work adjunctively. And now she's getting better care from that provider, whereas before things were sort of like happening to her and she wasn't necessarily being an active participant in her healing. Yeah.
I see. So you've sort of put her in a place of healing to be able to have more control over this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. In this particular case, based on where her readiness was, whenever we would broach the topics of, say, diet was a really big thing for her, because it was a support system to eat the way that she was eating, even though it was making her symptoms worse. Does that track? Yeah. And so if someone else were, say, ready, okay, I'm ready to switch out this food because even though it makes me feel emotionally safe, no, the long-term effects are not worth it. Mm-hmm. She was not at the point where that was an option for her. And if that is you, that is okay. And so for her, it was more so, okay, what medications am I presently on that I do not need to be on if I just switch this? Or, oh, I can just stop this and remove this specific stressor from my life, so then I don't have to be on this medication, you know?
I see. Have you ever dealt with somebody who had body image issues?
Yes. Most of the women that I work with have that. Wow. Yeah. I feel, yeah. And I have had experiences with that myself. I remember as a little girl, I looked like a beanstalk. No, I looked like a twig, honestly, before puberty. And I remember one day on the playground, I can't recall if this person was an adult or a teenager. They were like, oh, you have big knees, you're going to be fat. And prior to this specific moment in time, my friends and I would get so excited. Oh my gosh, I'm 90 pounds. I'm getting up to be 100. Like we were very excited to get bigger and stronger. But at this specific moment, I had never wanted to be smaller than I was in my life.
Wow.
And for a long time, especially like in that early teenage years, my relationship to my body was not good. I remember I did like 200 crunches in one day, like a crazy person, and like sped walk 2 miles. Like it was exercise anorexia, let's be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that a lot of women, even if we don't meet the diagnosis for an eating disorder or body dysmorphia, have some of these characteristics, or rather ways in which we relate to ourselves and to others. And so some of those things may be, oh, I can't wear that because I look like a pumpkin.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Or someone who, it's okay to say someone is fat. Fat is a substance as well as a physical thing that can be on your body. And so I notice also there's this self-deprecating humor that is sometimes associated with it. Oh yeah, I could never wear that. Like I gave someone a compliment, like, oh my goodness, you look like Twiggy, your eyes, your hair.
Mm-hmm.
And the response was like, yeah, like a fatter version. And it was like meant as a haha, like I'll say it so that you don't have to say it kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I notice with women, and it might occur in men as well, but my primary focus is on us because we're so underserved. And I want to make sure that we have voices, and own our power. Anyways, I digress. To put ourselves down, you know?
Absolutely.
And it's not okay. And me telling you that it's not okay, like you already know this. I would challenge to, when you're talking about yourself in that way, whether it's in your head or to someone else, to pause or just notice it. Just be mindful in that moment. Because saying those things in the same way that weight gain is a symptom, saying those things and talking about yourselves in that way is a symptom.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that, like, myself, I'm not there anymore, thank goodness. I love dressing up, and no, I don't really care. I am who I am. I'm like, oh, I feel a little bloated today. I wonder if it's around my period. Like I can objectively see, or like if the clothes doesn't fit, it's not you that's the problem, it's the clothes. Like shifting the framework that you don't fail, diets fail you. Like diets were created to fail,
Mm-hmm.
not to support you. And so we do a lot of like shifting framework and like discussing how we refer to ourselves, how we talk about ourselves, how we relate to other women. Yeah. And so when it comes to body image, I see that as a common thing, whether it's the major thing, like, oh, if I just lost 5 pounds, I'd be prettier, or I'd get that job, or my boyfriend will like me, or my girlfriend will like me, or my partner will love me, or I'll feel sexy. Oh, what makes you say that? Right?
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people do feel that way. I know myself, 16 years old, I didn't want to be judged. And I thought, one thing I could control at my age at that time was my weight, and it would bring me peace. And
Mhm.
and at that time, it's kind of like, as you grow up, a lot of people, they don't like get to know you on a soul level. They want to,
Mhm.
and I think the media and society teaches people how to get to know each other on this surface level for
Mhm.
these superficial things.
Mhm.
And someone could have a really big heart and
Mhm.
an amazing soul, but they
Mhm.
would never be that popular person or that person worth talking to, because they're judged based on
Mhm.
how they look, or whether they're attractive, or
Mhm.
whether they have the qualities of a media superstar. It's
Mhm.
and I think that's where there's this sort of clash between a person, especially when they're dealing with a disease, and just society, and how like almost narrow-minded everything is, or how
Mhm.
everything is just so surface level.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it's very disappointing. But uh, things are shifting, I think. I feel like most of us as women are fed up and do not want it for ourselves, our daughters, nieces, sisters, anyone who comes after us. Yeah, we're done with all of that.
Of course. And I think, back in the day, other generations, they didn't have all this, like, you had to look a certain way to be attractive. They didn't have all that. Like, life was so simple, and people respected one another for what they did have. And that's kind of, it's like, when did this become a rarity?
I feel like there was always something there with regards to looks, because if we think about like testosterone versus estrogen, for example, before they say in science, anthropology, and like the scientific history of human beings that men who had more testosterone were more aggressive, better homemakers, and they had like facial hair, right? And if he was clean shaven, he wasn't to be trusted, kind of deal. And so, like, a lot of cultures have these ways in which we function and see certain physical attributes that denote class, denote fertility. Like, there are some cultures that if you don't have birthing hips, I guess, you're a full bodied woman, then something is wrong. Like, if you're slimmer or a smaller statured woman, it's not as beneficial. Whereas Western culture, it's like, you should be skinny, blonde, blue eyed, tall, look like a model. And we're just like, how many of these people exist?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think all different cultures have these ways of viewing beauty, that the way in which you carry yourself denotes intelligence, your skin color, skin tone. Do you have straight hair? Do you have curly hair? Do you have green eyes? Do you have dark brown eyes?
Of
Yeah.
course. Yeah. And I think, a lot of it is about finding your sort of happiness within
Mm-hmm.
you. And, for the longest time, it's like you can let people define you, judge
Mm-hmm.
you, choose whether they accept you or not. But at the end of the day, you just have yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to accept you for you, because you're living with your own
Mm-hmm.
life. They're
Mm-hmm.
not living your life. And that's something that I had to understand, from an inner perspective, was that, what do I want my life to be? And,
Mm-hmm.
how am I going to sustain this? I
Mm-hmm.
want to live a life where I'm happy and I'm able to sustain something. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
200 crunches a day and speed walking 2 miles. I mean, I don't know, like, you know, you got to find that balance, you know.
Yep.
It's like
Yep.
and so I love how you mentioned that, but I think we got a lot of amazing information, and if
Hmm.
they want to get in contact with you, Dr. Nave,
Hmm.
where
Hmm.
do they go?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram and on Facebook at DrGaynelNave, so at Dr. Gaynel Nave on Instagram and on Facebook. And I also have a website, www.drgaynelnave.com. Doctor is written as DR. And yeah, so those are the spaces that I exist in the virtual world.
Amazing.
Yeah, and if anyone is in Grand Rapids, I am presently in Grand Rapids, Michigan, but I'm working with people virtually. That's how my practice is set up. So
Oh,
yeah.
that's awesome.
Hmm.
Great. Well, what's one takeaway we can go home with today?
Okay, that trauma healing is an important aspect of your healing, and spending the time to know yourself not just as a physical being, but spiritual, mental, and emotional is worth your time and investment because you are worth it.
I love that. Thank you so much, Dr. Nave.
Thank you for having me.